In this video, I'm going to give you a whirlwind tour of 14 ways culture can affect you at work. This is by no means an exhaustive list. It's the tip of the iceberg, just to give you the idea, to open your eyes to the many ways that national cultures of people from around the world that you're working with can affect you in the workplace. By culture, I'm not talking about fun, food, and festivals. By culture, I am talking about beliefs, these deep assumptions that we have about the world that we learn in the culture we were born, raised, and educated in. I'm talking about values, what we prefer in different situations, and I'm talking about social norms. Social norms are those rules that we all follow unconsciously, things like wearing clothes to work, yes, and many other social norms. Some of those norms we might share with people from around the world, especially when we're working in a multicultural, multinational setting. But there are many norms, many social norms that people are bringing with them from their cultures of origin. And those are the kind of things that we want to be thinking about when we look at the impact of culture on work in the workplace. My name is Brenda. I've been working with people from around the world for 30 years. I've been living abroad, working abroad, raising my kids abroad, doing all those things abroad from like 25 years ago. I have done a lot of things really well. I have made lots of mistakes, but the main thing I've done is always try to learn and learn and learn. I do a lot of research. I read all kinds of books and studies and take courses, do all kinds of things. So on this channel, what I do is make videos to give you shortcuts. I want to save you the decades that it took me to get a lot of these things. So stick with me and let's dive into our list of 14 ways that culture affects you in the workplace. Okay, number 1, time. The way we use time is so different around the world. And even if we agree in a multinational, multicultural setting, there's still going to be times when we notice, whether it's related to punctuality, to how we use time in a meeting, to how quickly we answer an email or don't. We're going to notice sort of the rhythms of time that are normal in other cultures. They might come out. It might be something we need to talk about and make agreements about in a multicultural setting. The second area of cultural differences is space. And when we look at space, the first thing is how close do we stand? How far do we stand? Do people touch each other? Or do they take care not to touch each other? These can create very important cultural misunderstandings in the workplace, so it's important to have that in mind as well. It affects us at work. Number 3, it's still in the category of space and our use of space, but different cultures lay out their offices in different ways. Some have a very tight, close working area where everybody's very close together. And in other cultures, people have a lot more space, personal space to work with, and even might prefer partitions between people, or it's even more high status to have an office with a door that you can close. The way we use space in the workplace is important, and it can affect the way we feel about our workspace depending on the culture that we come from. Number 4 is a big one. It's trust. How do you know if you can trust someone? How do they know if they can trust you? This is so culturally dependent. There are cultures around the world where people learn that you kind of dive in and start working together, and then you decide whether or not you can trust each other as you go. And if the other side lets you down, well, you just change to a different supplier or provider or partner or whatever. Then there are many cultures in the world where trust is sort of this lifelong thing, and you look for people that you really know you can trust, that you have bonds and connections with. Maybe they are qualified friends and family, or you take a long time to get to know people and build bonds through eating together, drinking together, doing all kinds of things together, depending on the culture that you're in. And that's a whole different kind of trust. But in a multinational setting, it's very important that we understand these different ways of building and maintaining trust. Otherwise, there can be some unfortunate misunderstandings. But if we understand each other, we actually can share our ways of building trust, and it can be even better than ever. Number 5 is teamwork. I come from the United States, where we have a way of working in teams which is often sort of very specialized, where each person plays this very specialized role, and then we all work together like a well-oiled machine. And I've come to work in Spain, where I've actually seen teams function in a very different way, with a lot more overlap and a lot more sort of getting into each other's area and working together in ways that are hard for me to understand. Teamwork around the world can be very different, and that's an area to explore with members of a multicultural team. Different ways of forming and teams and assigning roles and responsibilities and working together around the world can make big complications in the workplace, but they can also make really amazing innovations and things like that if we understand. So it's another area where we could be different. Number 6 is formality. In some cultures, people tend to be very formal in the workplace and use formal titles and dress very formally. In other cultures, people are very informal and maybe like to call each other by their first name. This might seem superficial, but it can have a lot of meaning for people from cultures around the world, so it's worth paying attention to as well. Number 7 is kind of explosive: conflict style. There are cultures, like where I come from, where at the heart of a conflict, we do believe that it can be very positive. It can be very good to work through a conflict, and you can get a lot of good results by putting things on the table and dealing with that conflict. But there are many cultures around the world where conflict is seen as quite negative, maybe even scary. It's really not a good thing, and you don't deal with it openly. Now, as you can imagine, in a multicultural workplace, multinational workplace, no matter how much we are all in sort of this international global environment, you bring with you the conflict styles that you've learned in your native culture, and it can be very difficult to manage conflicts. This is something where culture has a really big impact in the workplace. Number 8 is work styles. Now, we could talk about so many things in this area, but we're just going to look at one, and that's multitasking or single tasking. I know that everyone around the world in this day and age, well, not everywhere in the world, but many places we feel like we're all multitasking. Trust me, there are many cultures that might think they're multitasking, but in the workplace, we are much more single task and focused. Read my article to take the 2-question test and decide whether you're coming from a multitasking or single tasking culture. But this is an area where definitely it has a big impact in the workplace. If you are being expected to do many different things in your area of work, when you feel like you should be focusing on one main area, it can be very stressful, but there are cultures that require more of that than others. So think about how culture does impact that area of work. Number 9, work priorities. Did you know that there are cultures where you live to work? People work a lot and take their work very seriously, and they have very little vacation. They work longer hours. And cultures where you work to live. All right, and those are cultures where there's a lot more enjoyment going on, and people are much more concerned about quality of life. I've experienced a change between these two types of cultures, and believe me, what happens in the workplace is very different in a live-to-work culture and a work-to-live culture. So this is another area where culture has a big impact on our work, and it's useful to take it into account when we're working globally. Number 10, directness. This takes us into the area of intercultural communication. So in some cultures, communication is very direct and explicit. People say what they mean. And then in other cultures, communication is very indirect and implicit, and people just kind of go around and you have to know how to figure out the message. As you might imagine, there's a lot of problems in the workplace as a result of this, because the direct cultures tend to start getting suspicious of the indirect cultures because they feel they're not being clear with them. And the indirect cultures, which are very concerned about saving face and about harmony and making people feel, good about themselves, they can get a little bit hurt by the very direct communicators. And believe me, this can be personal. Yes, there's a personal aspect, but there is a huge impact of culture, your culture of birth, where you were raised and educated and you learned how to communicate more directly or less directly depending on the culture where you grew up. Number 11 is also related to intercultural communication and sort of relationships too. It's feedback, giving negative feedback. There are cultures where you can do this very directly and cultures where not only should it be indirect, it should never be said. It should be negative feedback should come in ways that that will save someone's face and keep the harmony of the group and never ruffle anybody's feathers or make any waves. All right. So you can imagine this is important in the workplace. It's key to working together to be able to give each other feedback. So it's an area where culture plays a huge role, and I recommend learning as much as you can about it. Number 12 is the role a manager plays. Now we're into the area of the whole area of managing in general. There's a lot written for managers, but I feel that we need to spend more time and resources writing for those who are managed. So that's kind of what I'm thinking here. So you've got a manager, you've got a boss, and different cultures have very different ideas about the role the manager should play. So you might come from a culture that is much more egalitarian and wants the manager to kind of be part of the team and simply empowering the members of the team. But then there are many cultures, you might come from one of those, where it's much more hierarchical and the boss plays a much more authoritarian role. So this is another area that's really important to explore in order to be able to work together and appreciate each other's differences and what we can bring from our different cultures into the workplace, but culture plays a big role. Number 13 is decision making, and we're still looking at this whole area of like managing multiculturally. And it's easy to misinterpret the way decisions are made in the workplace and to feel that somehow we were left out or maybe we were over consulted. But around the world, there are very different models for how to make decisions. Every culture has its own formula. Some cultures are very consensus oriented, and they will do a lot of consulting to the point that people from cultures where there's not so much consensus needed could feel over-consulted. And then there's other cultures where the leaders make the decision and that's it. So this is another area where culture plays a fundamental role. Very interesting to know as much as you can if you're working multinationally. And finally, number 14, we're looking at rewards and what motivates people. So again, this is sort of in the area of managing people multiculturally, and the leaders or the managers are going to be coming up with ways to motivate everyone to work harder and better and to be happy at work. But what's really important to know is that culture, we learn in our culture growing up, what is that prize that we want to get? What is it that we're aiming for? And therefore, when we're trying to motivate people from another culture, they may not be motivated by what we're offering. I have experienced this. It's really interesting to go from your country and I lived in my country for over half of my life and worked in many different capacities, and then to come to a different country and to find that there's a whole different idea about what's going to motivate people to work. And it's very hard to sort of shift your own motivation, to feel motivated by what's being offered there. Now, I'm pointing that out because in whatever capacity you're working in multinationally or multiculturally, whether it's you who needs to feel more motivated or it's other people around you, it's important to understand the role that culture plays in what motivates us and what we consider to be a reward for our work, for our good hard work, because that's a way where we're going to, again, be more effective working together if we can understand each other and help each other get the rewards that they're looking for in the workplace. All right, so that was your whirlwind tour of 14 ways that culture can affect you and probably does affect you in the workplace if you're working with people from other cultures. I find this to be so relevant because it's really easy to misunderstand people from other cultures when it's actually something that does have a cultural base and it does have a cultural explanation. So this is just a little tiny tip of the iceberg, but if you find this interesting, I recommend, first of all, checking out the article that is in the link below, or maybe you found this video in the article, and then looking at the books that I recommend, especially if you like to read. If you're not really into reading books in English or whatever, just keep watching videos here on this channel and checking out what I put up every week, because I will keep on taking you more deeply into each one of these areas and many more. Thank you so much for joining me. I love having all of you on this channel. I appreciate you watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please give me a like. That would be really great. That's my little reward there. And also subscribe, because then you'll be first in line for many more videos just like this, which I'm putting up every week to help you, again, get that shortcut so you don't have to go through the years of confusion that I went through and culture shock while I was trying to figure all of these things out. And I have to say, after 30 years, there are still many things that I need to figure out, but I feel much more at peace and much happier working globally, internationally, because I've solved a lot of these puzzles that made it kind of difficult at the beginning. But it's a very exciting journey, and it's worthwhile, both professionally and personally. So stick with it, and thanks for joining me.